Welcome to Coffee with Kupke, a production of St. Paul Inside the Walls. Here on Coffee with Kupke, we grab a cup of coffee, at least we're claiming this is coffee. We sit with Monsignor Raymond Kupke, the pastor of St. Anthony's in Hawthorne, professor at Immaculate Conception Seminary, diocesan archivist. We sit with Monsignor Kupke to delve into the history of Catholicism in the Diocese of Paterson. My name is Father Paul Manning. I am the vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of Paterson. And here I am with Monsignor Kupke. So grab your cup of coffee and let's jump right in. I'm going to take a sip. Monsignor Kupke, continuing in Chapter 8, I want to mention that I noticed something in the footnotes in Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. You have multiple footnotes from the ADP. And I'm looking at the footnotes and I'm saying, what is ADP? So I went to the beginning of the footnotes.
Archives of the Diocese of Paterson.
Yeah. So up to chapters 7 and 8, we're in the AAN,
right?
Archives of the Archdiocese of Newark. And so I'm assuming you did a lot of research in the Archives of Newark. Where are they held?
Mostly at Seton Hall.
Oh. And just a big library full of stuff?
Basically, the Newark archives are very professional. They have like half the ground floor of the library. And it's not only the Archdiocesan archives, but also the university archives.
Okay.
So they have a full-time staff, professionally trained, and it's a nice setup they have there.
And well, from this point on, we're mostly in the
Now that
ADP.
we're moving our archives up here by you,
Yes.
We're certainly going to have at least as nice a setup.
Okay. So our archives...
For the fifth time I've moved it, but
Yeah.
It's another story.
You can tell how happy he is. You've moved the archives 5 times?
4 times, yeah.
Okay. This is number 5?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're getting good at
It's
it,
like
I suppose.
moving somebody's attic.
Yeah. Okay. So we have this tremendous growth in the diocese, and you have a section in which you talk about Father Scully, Robert Rowe,
Yes.
and Salvatore Ruggiero.
Yeah. This is Wayne.
Yeah, so these 3 guys do a strategic plan for parishes in Wayne.
They did. Scully, there was one parish in Wayne.
And that was?
Holy Cross.
Wow, that's the first one.
That's the original one. That was one of the Franciscan missions, goes back to 1905 or something like that. And it's way down in the part of Wayne that people don't even realize is in Wayne,
That's true.
Down in Mountainside.
Yeah, Route 23.
Yeah, the
right.
part of Wayne that gets flooded all the time. So Scully was pastor there. And so between him and Rowe, who was the mayor of Wayne,
Okay.
and then later would become congressman, and then also this developer,
Salvatore
Ruggiero. Between them, they kind of, Wayne was a
pretty big geographically.
big geographic township, and in the minds of people in Passaic County at that time, this was the end of Passaic County. They did not even admit that West Milford and Wanacue were out there.
Yeah.
Wayne was the end of the world.
Okay.
And this is before Willowbrook.
Yes.
Before all of that, in the days of the old Willowbrook traffic circle, that was
the
bottleneck there.
And 80 hadn't been built that way.
Put through, yeah. So, and there had started to be growth, particularly around a lake community called Packanack Lake.
Packanack Lake, it's a real place.
Right. So in the 50s, that developed into a kind of a remote bedroom community of Paterson. So these guys, were on the site in Wayne, and they saw what was happening, and They knew what development applications there were for housing development and everything. So between them, they just kind of figured that Wayne would be divided into 5 parishes, and
Now, did they
began looking for property.
Yeah, did they take this upon themselves? Were they given a mandate from the bishop or the diocese to do this?
I don't think a mandate. I think an okay.
Okay.
Or yeah, sure, do, but certainly they were responsible for where Our Lady of the Valley is.
Yeah, this is
Immaculate
amazing
Heart
to me.
in Wayne.
Yeah. So this is real.
And the Consolation and ultimately Annunciation.
Somebody with a strategic vision, I'm assuming Scully and his friends, looking at a map, right, and deciding here's what would make sense.
Yeah, they looked at the map of the township. Again, the mayor knew how many applications they were getting.
Well, it was almost 2,000
new
houses
housing and
coming in.
Tracks. Yeah. So he knew where these were going in. He knew what properties were still open.
And so they bought the properties.
So they started buying farms. And yeah.
And so just situate the parishes in Wayne for us, if you can do that.
If you look at it, Mountainside, Holy Cross is all the way down at the bottom.
Right.
And then you have kind of next to each other, Preakness, Our Lady of the Valley.
Yes.
On to the right, and then Packanack Lake, Immaculate Heart.
Of Mary.
And then a little bit later on, about 8 years later, the northern part of Wayne, Annunciation and Consolation.
Yes. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of my favorite letters, in
the ADP, Archives of the Diocese of Paterson.
It's unthinkable now, but who knows, what happens. The pastor of Pompton Lakes, so we're talking the Franciscans
St. Mary's.
St. Mary's. His school is so big, which we've closed now. His school is so big, it's bursting at the seams. And he writes to the next Bishop, Nava, asking for permission to build a second school.
Wow.
A second parish school in the Pines Lake area of Wayne, where much of these new kids are coming from. And Nava kind of writes back to him and says, well, we're actually going to put a new parish there.
Oh, and which parish?
This is Consolation.
Okay, got it. Yeah, which had a school.
A school, yeah.
I need to just mention the storied pastor in Wayne, Our Lady of the Valley, Jake Rugel.
James J. Rugel.
Yeah, so he was the founding pastor of Our Lady of the Valley?
He was.
And I mention him because I almost feel like a spiritual lineage.
Kinship, yes.
Because, oftentimes our pastors are very influential on us as priests. So my first pastor, Monsignor Kevin Flanagan, is influential in my life. And the pastor that he spoke about as being most influential in his parish priesting is Jake Rugel. He always talked about what a pastor Jake Rugel was. So I almost feel like he's a spiritual
like a
grandfather.
Grandson,
yeah.
And just to connect it a little bit in another direction, Jake Rugel and Bishop Rodimer were curates together at St. Brendan's in Clifton.
Okay. Wow.
When Jake retired, Rodimer would often have to write letters for these events, that would be put in.
Yes.
But when it came to Jake's retirement, it was a very personal letter in which Rodimer said, I remember as if it were yesterday when you moved out of our rectory at St. Brendan's and your enthusiasm as you began to build this new parish.
Wow. And Jake was there for a long, long time,
Long
right?
time, yeah.
So Wayne is bursting at the seams, but to my surprise, you said the fastest growing community in the 50s and 60s was Kinnelon.
Kinnelon, yeah.
Now, in some ways, that seems a little bit rural compared to some of these other places, but back then it was
as late as I think the 1950 census, Kinnelon had less than 1,000 people. Florham Park in the 1940 census only had 740 people.
Wow.
They just got zapped by the baby boom.
The post-war,
the post-war. So proportionately, Kinnelon grew the most. It became a place. Most people had no idea where it was. There was this.
Some still don't know.
Yes,
right?
right.
I mean, Our Lady of Magnificat is still tucked away.
Yes, yeah. It's almost as remote as St. Bernard's and Mount Hope.
Yeah, that's right.
But and of course, Kinnelon has such a charming story. Our Lady of Magnificat.
Yeah. So I was going to throw you this softball and say I wanted you to talk about Boland's big ask. So this is before Bishop McNulty. This is under Bishop Boland. He sees the growth in Kinnelon and decides maybe he needs to make a connection with somebody. So why don't you tell us this?
Well, John Tracy Ellis, who was the
famous Catholic historian,
Catholic Church historian at Catholic U, he's had a famous line that the propagation of the church was less the task of bishops and missionaries, and more it was just pretty Catholic princesses that got married off to these pagan chieftains, and next thing you knew, a whole tribe would jump in the river and be baptized. So Kinnelon's a little bit in that story, in that vein. This non-Catholic gentleman,
Henry Miller,
married a Catholic lady, and apparently he was madly in love with her, and it pained him that she had to go all the way down to Butler to go to Mass, because they lived on his estate in Kinnelon, like a 60-acre spread in Kinnelon.
Yeah, near Facing Lakes.
Right.
Yeah.
So he decided to build her.
And he was Anglican, wasn't he?
He was Anglican.
Yeah.
Episcopal. So he decided to build her a church, and he remembered a Anglican church that he had seen in England. For all I know, it may be the church in Grantchester today. But,
it's called Harum Chapel.
Yeah. So he had this in his mind, and he built this chapel there, but also needed to connect to the diocese in the sense of permission to have Mass there and have the Eucharist there. So he got connected with Boland. Boland was, Boland was not a hail fellow, well-met type. He was much quieter and much more reserved than that. But if you met him, if you dealt with him, you were a friend for life kind of thing.
Yeah, he was an impressive guy.
He was not a politician,
right,
but
authentic and impressive. Yeah.
So they became good friends, and the next thing Mr. Miller is donating this church in his will and the property to the diocese. And I think for a while they were caught off guard because there was no need exactly for a church in Kinnelon. It wasn't that big, but eventually it does become the center. Yes. That's why even today the church property in Kinnelon is all over the place.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's it's got a church and a school and a rectory and a cemetery, and a chapel, still the original chapel, but they're almost like on different ends of the property.
Right.
You have to drive from one to the other.
I just did a baptism there not too long ago in that beautiful chapel.
Apparently, Bishop Sweeney has relatives up there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was the one church in the diocese he knew.
Well, you said when Boland was on the way, I forget, he was with someone else, and he kind of said to the guy he was with, let's not do the hard press. Let's not be
Let's just let it happen.
Yeah, let it be natural.
Yeah.
But he had an idea that I think it would be dedicated to the Blessed Mother in some way. And Miller had the same idea.
Yes.
And so I think it was Boland who came up with the rather unique title, Our Lady
I think
of
it's
the
the only
Magnificat.
one around. I've never heard in one of the church with that exact title.
Yeah, Our Lady named for the beautiful hymn that she praises
You have
God
a lot of visitation churches, but
not Magnificat.
not Magnificat.
Another interesting story, origin story for one of these parishes that arises at this time is the story of St. Catherine Mountain Lakes.
Yeah.
So that's, remember, the parish that is a beginning in a Masonic temple.
Right.
But how did St. Catherine's come about?
St. Catherine's is one of the rare ones, maybe not rare, but where really the lay population
That's what I was going to say.
is the spearhead for the parish.
So this is a parish that emerges from the grassroots.
Right. Mountain Lakes has always been a very small town, but always with its own identity. For example, earlier in the century, most of that area went to Boonton High School, except for Mountain Lakes. They had their own high school as far back as the 20s.
Okay.
So small, but, they were always a little bit separate identity. So
was it always rather well-to-do?
Yeah.
Because they were summer homes for...
Yes,
yeah, okay.
and they had been built by a builder from the craftsman movement.
Yes.
And
yeah, kind of
but
unique.
basically they dammed up a couple of bogs in that area.
Bogs, okay.
Yeah, or literally swamps, and made them into lakes. That's where several of those were.
Yeah.
And so it always had its own little identity there.
Yeah, so I grew up on a swamp in Ironia, which it's literally a bog. But I always said I grew up on the headwaters of the Black River. It sounds a lot better.
Sounds much nicer. So they basically petitioned McNulty.
And it sounds like he was a little bit reluctant because this was not coming from... I think the pastor of Mount Carmel was a little bit reluctant.
Yeah, he was horrified.
Okay, he didn't want to do this.
No. And if you look at Mountain Lakes just as Mountain Lakes, it doesn't look big enough to be able to support this. But ultimately, they add several lake communities from precipitory hills onto the...
Yes.
For example, Lake Intervale.
Yes.
And
there was a section of Denville.
Yes.
That got
Lake Arrowhead or one of those.
I tell you, the pastors, surrounding pastors, must not have been too happy with that.
No. None of them were ever happy when somebody
you get
says,
carved.
I'm taking half your parish. So I sat in as vice chancellor on a couple of those meetings, and I never saw anything like it. The meeting that produced St. Kateri in Sparta, Charlie Cassidy walked out of that meeting.
Wow.
He was so mad.
Well, did they have a map in front and they're trying to decide?
Yes.
Where?
And Charlie Cassidy had an idea of what he was willing to give up to
the new parish.
From Our Lady of the Lake, and it was practically nothing. It was like one little lake, and then they say, well, we were also thinking of giving this lake, and this lake, and he says, well, I didn't know I was being invited to the rape of Our Lady of the Lake. Oh. And he threw down his and walked out.
Now, Charlie Cassidy was one of the guys who went to the Spanish missions. Was that? Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so we got a little off track there.
Yeah. Well,
St. Catherine's, so basically it developed. McNulty reluctantly, went ahead and
allowed this grassroots movement to create a parish.
Yeah. There's a charming legend about 3 of those parishes that somebody complained to McNulty that all the parishes in the diocese were named for men, except for the Marian parishes.
Yes.
That there were hardly any churches in the Diocese of Paterson that were named for holy women. So in the next year, we get St. Teresa's in Succasunna, St. Rose in East Hanover, and St. Catherine's in Mountain Lakes, all in 1 year with female saints.
Now it's funny. Somebody just told me this story. Did you give this mention this in a talk or something lately?
I probably did in one of those 3 parishes.
Yeah, because I just heard this that there was no parishes named for women, and that's why this happened. So let's do one more of the parishes named for a woman. St. Teresa's in Succasunna, which you remember started in the Ledgewood roller rink.
Right.
But what was interesting about that was that the church, they had a church early on.
Borrowed the church, yes. They stole the church. One of the things that I find interesting is that the original prospectus for this new parish, when you think of what it involves today, this was going to be a new parish for Randolph and Roxbury together.
Yes.
Today, this would be like 40,000 people, but back then, Route 10 was still a rural road, that barely had anything on it but the firehouse here or there. And so ultimately, the founding pastor, Leo Lambert, was coming out of St. Teresa's in Paterson, and he knew that the original St. Teresa's
in Paterson
was a Sears Roebuck, building that could be disassembled. So he talked to the pastor and says, wouldn't you want to give me as a gift for my new parish, your building? So he did. And basically they disassembled the church, put it on a flatbed truck, and carted it up to Succasunna. And they constructed it on the corner, of this new property.
And that was what year? That was 50...
57, 56,
okay.
Yeah.
Because I was in that church for Mass many, many times.
Yeah.
When in Ironia, we went either to St. Lawrence in Chester or St. Teresa's Succasunna, and depending on the Mass schedule, oftentimes we're in that little church.
The crazy thing is that, it's not that crazy. It happened in a couple of places. It also happened in Montville. They bought the rectory first. So before they actually bought the property for the church. So for many, many years, decades, St. Teresa's rectory was on the other side of Route 10 from where the church was. And it was a very awkward situation.
That just only resolved recently. Within the last 5 years, maybe 5 or 6 years.
I think Mark Mancini built the rectory and then got transferred and never lived in it.
Yeah, that's what happens. So when we get together again, we're going to talk about one more of the parishes that were created at this time, and then we're going to talk about Catholic education.
All right.